Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too want to thank our witnesses for appearing today and for sharing their insights about the state of aviation in this country. The United States is a leader in aerospace design and manufacturing, which is also the source of thousands of high-quality jobs. We've always had a tradition of building advanced aircraft and introducing new technologies that can provide for superior safety travel experiences for the American passenger. However, in an economy barely coming out of a recession, the aviation industry is struggling to hold on while facing high taxes both at home and abroad, highly volatile fuel prices, and an increasing number of regulations. It is important that we reduce the tax burdens on airlines, which are inevitably passed on to the American traveling public. Apart from the high departure and arrival taxes for flying into countries like Germany and the UK, our airlines are now expected to pay a tax to the European Union as part of their emissions trading system. This is clearly a unilateral tax grab on American operators without any guarantees for how those revenues are going to be used. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on how this tax could affect aviation competitiveness. Additionally, I hope that the witnesses can highlight the important role small businesses play in the aviation industry. While many know that small businesses play an important role in the overall economy, I think most are surprised at how significantly small businesses impact the aviation industry. Be it in the area of innovation, employee development, component manufacturing, FAA contracting, or just as a consumer, without small businesses, the U.S. aviation industry would not be the leader that it is today. However, like small businesses throughout the nation, aviation-focused small businesses also face considerable challenges, and I look forward to hearing what can be done to reverse this trend. Ultimately, our goal should be to retain our global leadership position in the aerospace industry, and the solutions have to include lower taxes, less regulation, more innovation, and greater energy independence. Madam Chairwoman, thank you again for holding this hearing. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to the Senator from New Jersey's line of questioning about sequestration, the House of Representatives this afternoon passed a bill 414-2 that would require the administration to put forward a plan for implementation of sequestration. I've got a companion bill in the Senate along with Senator Sessions that would require that. I think it would be very helpful for a lot of decision making, not only ours but yours, to at least have an idea about how this sequestration is going to be implemented. And so I hope we can get that acted on here in the Senate, particularly with the big vote coming out of the House today. I want to ask a question, and anybody in the panel feel free to answer this, but the EU emission trading scheme is clearly, in my view, a unilateral and unfair tax policy that is hurting U.S. operators flying into and out of Europe. And my view is we need to protect our operators and the traveling public from this unnecessary tax. And I guess the question, one, is do you agree? And if you do, what impact do increased taxes, especially when they're collected for a country's treasury as opposed for general or for aviation infrastructure operations, what impact do taxes like that have on the U.S. aviation competitiveness?
Senator Thune, with respect to the ETS, it just doesn't accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. There are other means to reduce emissions that are much more efficient. ICAO, as was mentioned earlier, across the industry, we've come up with an agreement that as an industry will improve the fuel efficiency and reduce the emissions of the global fleet by 1.5% a year. By 2020, we've agreed to achieve carbon neutral growth. By 2050, we've agreed that we will be able, or we will strive to cut the amount of emissions in half from the 2005 baseline. We're focusing on coming up with a metric and then standards for each new product, and also investing in biofuels. So there are other ways to achieve emissions. The ETS scheme, because it's regional and because it's not covering the aerospace sector but just throwing it up, it will cause taxes that will never get fed back into the system to improve the basic problem of reducing emissions, improving the products. And so I just think it's pointed in the wrong direction, and it'll end up distorting markets, because what counts in that scheme is where you took off from, and if you land in Europe, you're taxed for the full region. So people will be taxed unfairly based on what their current route structure is and frequency, and it'll have nothing to do with reducing emissions, in my opinion.
Senator Thune, if I could just add, agree with everything Dr. Tracy said. I think the impact will be, as I noted earlier, you increase prices, you suppress demand, and the prices are only going to go up over time. And in particular, I would note that this is not going back into aviation. It's not going to the environment. It's forever they want it for.
Senator, I was just over at Eurocontrol in Brussels about 2 weeks ago, and they gave us a briefing on their ability to implement single European skies, and they pretty much given up on an ability even to integrate what's called functional airspace blocks, just to be able to get a basic system where they can get their controllers talking to one another and working together. So right now, they don't have any ability to use all of the benefits that we call Next Gen over here. Their research arm is called SAR there, because they just can't get their airspace act together. So it's each individual country with their own controllers that each have different wage scales, and there is no political will to cobble this thing together and really do single European skies, which is really where they'll get the environmental gains. I would argue that if they were really serious about doing something about the environment, the first thing they would do is make single European skies work, and then talk about taxing after that. So it is really something that I think when you have a chance to talk to your European colleagues, and when we go to Brussels and we talk to the European Commission, we very much get the feeling that it is not the people responsible for aviation that's driving this train and has dug their feet in on this issue. It's an interesting thing within the European Parliament where the folks, the environmental ministers, have really driven this train there against all reason of what the aviation community has.
Okay. Madam Chair, I see my time has expired. Another question, but I can ask it later.
Thank you. Senator Warner.
Thank you. Could we add leg space for tall people to the Senator from New Jersey's list of? That'd be nice.
Senator, I would agree with that.
Two quick things, just in panel can respond to them, but the Finance Committee today voted to report out permanent normal trade relations with Russia. And that's something that I know Boeing took, I think, a public position on. But just curious as to why, maybe you could elaborate on that, why it's important. And then secondly, the so-called fiscal cliff, which includes the sequester, which we've talked a little bit about, but also tax increases that occur on January 1 of next year, what that might mean not only to your operations or those you represent, but also just the impact on small businesses. How many small businesses are sort of in the chain, so to speak, supply chain of the various manufacturers, airlines, I mean, right down the list. It seems to me at least there are a lot of small businesses that would be impacted, that when we talk about jobs, we talk about the large employers, obviously, but there's that ripple effect that goes out throughout the entire economy, which I think impacts a lot of small businesses. So maybe first question on PNTR, second question and dealing with the issue of the fiscal cliff, the impact of the sequester, and increasing tax rates on small businesses that might be a part of that supply chain. Whoever.
Excuse me, Senator Thune. That's good news, PNTR. The position on, I'm assuming you mean the repeal of Jackson-Vanik.
Repeal of Jackson-Vanik, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Well, that's very important because now with Russia and WTO, we're not going to have to, Boeing and any of our companies are not going to have to deal with higher tariffs when it competes with other countries. And so I think that's great news. And for global competitiveness, you don't want to have some steep tariff added to your product. So with regard to that, and your point about small business and sequestration, I think is a very good one. Clearly, if the big companies are letting people go or have to let people go, if we're making these huge cuts on the defense side, for instance, all these primes have hundreds and hundreds of suppliers, which will be undoubtedly negatively impacted by the reduction in the primes and the OEMs. So the ripple effect is going to be huge. And on the civil side, there will be a report coming out in August that examines the very question we were talking about earlier about the different scenarios of sequestration to specifically FAA and the civil aviation industry writ large, that ripple effect you're talking about, what it's likely to do. So that ought to be out within about 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, be interested in seeing that.
Senator Thune, I echo Mr. Elwell's comments on PNTR. I also like to mention that with respect to small business, just our company alone has over 8,000 small business partners where we spend $4 billion a year. We're quite concerned that under sequestration, they might not have the robustness to carry them through any perturbations into their normal business plans that they were counting on. And so this is a concern for us because it takes all types of suppliers, large suppliers, small suppliers, to have a healthy ecosystem and keep coming up with innovative ideas for our products and services.
Okay. Senator, I just add that with sequestration, as we look toward the effects, one of the things is certification officials at the FAA are not considered safety critical. So if they're going to make some cuts, and we've already talked about potentially pushing next gen way out and cuts in the operations account, if you go ahead and stop the certification activities because of budget constraints, then our small business suppliers that was just talked about, they are on the end of that whip, and the amplitude of that whip gets really big out there. The smaller they are, the less capability they have to cover if there's some kind of stop because there's no certification officials to be able to get the product through the system.
Okay. Madam Chair?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I had just a very short thing to say about PNTR. If PNTR and WTO were only about tariffs, that'd be great. I mean, the tariff part we think is to our advantage, but there's it's actually a much more complex situation than joining the WTO or not in tariffs. Russia is very comfortable with offsets and other arrangements that help build their aerospace industry. When you look at again some of the complexities of the national policies that other countries are using, that I think is what we think has the greater leverage. So in my testimony, I talked about what we should have as a national manufacturing strategy. I think that part of it is where we have a lot of potential. So again, it's kind of confusing sometimes. You think about, okay, Russia goes into the WTO, that's a good thing. Actually, the dynamic we think is a lot more complicated. So we're thinking about what is what can maximize our potential for our domestic industry, and we start with sort of a manufacturing strategy, and then the trade strategy would follow out of that.